Hi, and hello, and welcome to another episode of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Very pleased to have you along. The phone number here for call in is area code 603, of course, and it's 640-3091. That's 640-3091. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to call in. Welcome those, and you don't have to agree with me. And probably 50% of the people who call in over time don't, and that's fine. So either way, if you want your voice heard, you certainly have an opportunity here. To that regard, I'd like to reiterate something about this program. I have invited people on. I've had some school board members and members of the Automatic Board on from time to time. It's always possible to get a hold of me. You can email me at jamesoconnell80@gmail.com. And if you email me, I'd be happy to consider anybody to come on the show. If if you're an educator or an administrator or a parent or a student or whatever, please drop me an email at James O'Connell. That's OCONNELL 80@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to. Talk to you and see if we can schedule a time to have you come on and talk. So with that said, again, the call-in number is 640-3091. So first of all, this show is on Tuesday night. We're live. If you're watching right now, it's Tuesday night. The show is repeated numerous times during the week, and that's why I say it that way. But it's the 6th. Now tomorrow, the 7th, it's just been announced that the Manchester School District, because of the snow emergency tomorrow, the Manchester schools will be closing early tomorrow. And there's an early closing. Let me see if I have it here. There's an early school closing schedule that's gone out on the various systems in the last hour or so. So if this is for it will take effect on Wednesday the 7th. Middle schools will close in Manchester at 12 noon. Elementary and high schools will be closed at 12:53. Preschool and after school activities are cancelled. So once again, for tomorrow, February the 7th, middle schools close at 12 p.m. tomorrow. Elementary and high schools close at 12:53. That's because there's an expected snowstorm coming in. I haven't seen the exact scale of it just yet, but I heard earlier today it was 6 to 12 inches. So people should be making arrangements for that. One of the things I wanted to talk about, I was at a meeting last night. There was a meeting at McGregor Street. It was a first meeting of the, I don't know what the proper title it might have is, of the Parental Involvement Subcommittee. It's a new subcommittee of the Board, Mayor and Alderman. And the three members on the subcommittee, it's chaired by newly elected school board member Jimmy LaHoo, and the other two members are Mary Georges and Dave Scannell. And one of the things that came out of last night's meeting is that they're going to do an outreach to various. I think anybody they'd be happy to hear from anybody, I'm sure, but they're going to do an outreach to parents groups like PTGs and PTO, PTAs in the city. And talk to principals, etc., to get the word out, just to see, to get some interested parties to and to have a I don't know if roundtable discussion is the right thing. I don't think it's quite that, but to have an open exchange of views with parents to see what the scope of this committee might be and the things that are on parents' minds. So that meeting is proposed for March 14th. And a discussion ensued about what the location should be, and some people thought it would be a good idea to have this meeting out in the neighborhoods, in the schools, and some others thought they liked the setting of City Hall. I know that some people liked there was a meeting held by the by the redistricting committee last year, where there was an opportunity for a question and answer or a back and forth between the members of that subcommittee and the public, and so it was different from just having members of the school board or the aldermanic board sitting there and having people go up to do their 3 minutes each, and then nothing said about anything and people just move on. So I know people like that format. So the plan is to have a meeting like this on the 14th of March. I know that this is an issue that's dear to school board member Lahu's heart, and that he has his ideas about how it should move forward. But he's open to hearing from all of us as to what we think. And the difficulty, I think, is how do you get, in my view, how do you get beyond the same talking heads? So I include myself in that, right? So you hold a meeting and you have and who shows up. If you go to, as an example, there were meetings on over the last 2 weeks about the budget, and one was held at Parkside, and one was held at, I think it was Memorial, a high school. Now, I wasn't at the Memorial meeting, but I was at the one at Parkside. And at the one at Parkside, other than public officials, members of the school board, board mayor and alderman, or members of the administration who were there for work purposes, there were probably 3 or 4 members of the public. There might have been 4. But it was either 3 or 4. Now, I'm only saying that not to cast any slight on anyone. I'm just saying there's your level of involvement. If you look at the school board, the coffee with the superintendent. So this superintendent has done a good job of going out into the schools. I'll go back to my point earlier about parent involvement, but just I want to on the go to the schools thing. It wasn't always true that superintendents came out and visited the schools. The effect of Dr. Vargas coming out to 2 schools every few weeks is that he is in every school. He has an opportunity to actually be in each building. And when you have as busy a schedule as the superintendent has, it's not always, it shouldn't be taken for granted that the superintendent's out in the schools, because he's not, or in the previous case, she was not. So at least Dr. Vargas has put himself there. It's public. The next one, by the way, is on tomorrow morning, February 7th at 7:30 at Green Acres. And then on Thursday at 4:30, he'll be at West High School. So that's February 7th at 7:30 at Green Acres, and February 8th, Thursday at 4:30 at West High School. Now, on each of these occasions, the purpose is to go out and listen to people in the school, listen to parents, listen to teachers, listen to whoever. Dr. Vargas doesn't. I think it's a wonderful thing. He goes out, he lays out a very brief, less than 5 minutes sort of overview of maybe where things are or whatever, but then it's there to listen to people. And it's a great thing. Now back to the parents thing. The fact is that he's been doing this for a year, and of the year and a half he's been here, and typically the last one I was at was 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, and there were 2 people there who were not either. There were 2 parents at the meeting. So Dr. Vargas is out every once a month, twice a month. He gives an opportunity for parents to come to a school and talk to them about whatever they want, and you can have a sidebar with. It's not as though you have to be you have to sort of go up to a microphone and speak in front of the public, and you can be very private about it. You have an opportunity to take Dr. Vargas aside, and from time to time people do, but mostly they don't. And so now when we talk about parental involvement committee issues, I'm all for parental involvement. This is why I'm here. I'm a parent. It's my only entree to education. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a principal. I'm not an administrator. I'm not a vendor. I don't sell products to schools. I don't. My only involvement is I am passionate about education. I think education is the key to economic development for a community, and the key to its well-being. I think it's the key to a healthy democracy, and it's the key to personal empowerment. The thing that lifts people from one level of income to another is it's based on education, or buying lottery tickets. Buying lottery tickets is an awful lot more difficult strategy. Education is empowering, and so that's why I'm involved. And then I think parental involvement is very, very important. But in the end, so this opportunity that's granted by Dr. Vargas's visits to the schools is taken advantage of by a small number of people. I think it's a good reflection in one way, because as I've said many times, I remember talking to a resource officer, a police officer in one of the schools, and it was a lady police officer, and she would come to parent meetings, and then she found herself with nothing to say, and she used to say to me, each month she'd just say a couple of words, and she would say to me, I feel bad that that I don't have a lot to say. And I said, don't worry about it, because there's a day going to come sometime, because it's just in the nature of things, that an incident will happen someday, and you'll walk into a meeting at this school or another one, and there's going to be 200 people, and they'll all want to scream at you or ask you questions all at the same time. So the fact that you don't have much to talk about is actually probably a very good thing. Likewise, the issue with parents not showing up for these events can be seen as a relatively good thing. Now, there's lots of negatives to it, but it also means that there aren't significant issues. If there was another issue like the issue that happened at one of our high schools a couple of years ago of a sexual assault, I think that if there was a gun in the school, if there was some major, God forbid, some major incident, then people would be, buildings will be full and people will be there. The fact that they're not is perhaps there's some level of jadedness on behalf of some, but I think mostly it's because people are things haven't risen to a level where they feel like they have to come up from their kitchen table, etc. So. I'm mindful of the issue of church and people going to church on Sundays, and I just thought about this last week, because it was during the Super Bowl, and there was a mass at the cathedral, St. Joseph's Cathedral in Manchester, at 7:00. For those people who are Catholic, it's the last mass in the city on a Sunday night. So invariably, there are people there from all around the city who find themselves coming to St. Joseph's Cathedral on Sunday nights, and it's a mass I like for that reason, because there's always a diverse group of people there. And of course, this past Sunday, it happened to clash with the Super Bowl, and of course, so the crowd was lighter than it usually would be. But I have been in that cathedral. I remember being there a couple of days after the 9/11 tragedy attack, and the cathedral was packed. It was a Wednesday night, I think it was. I think it was Wednesday night. I'm not sure, but it was a midweek night anyway, and it was a ceremony that was planned, 24 hours or 36 hours after the attack on the World Trade Center and on the Pentagon, and the plane going down in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and the cathedral was packed, and people were prayerful and tearful, and and it was a very moving. It was a very moving ceremony, and it was the community coming together in an outpouring of grief and solidarity, etc. So the idea that there aren't a lot of people showing up to meetings for parents, I can tell you the day after something happens, all the meetings are full. And by the way, just to be cynical for a minute, and everybody there knows everything, and they've all got the strongest held opinions, which they've kept to themselves for the preceding number of years. So anyway, back to Jimmy LaHoo, committee member Jimmy LaHoo's committee. What falls to them is the task, I think, of expanding parental involvement. Now, I'm hope that I've talked to the committee chairman about coming on the show, and he may do that, or he will do that at the time at the appropriate time when they're ready to move forward with the committee. But the big question is, how do you bring more people in, more parents in, and to what purpose? In the very limited scope of things, so let's hear from parents and what they want, or let's learn from them what they know, or what things worry them the most, and let's respond to that. In anticipation of this meeting on March 14th, I think one of the mistakes that it is possible to make here is to continue to do the same thing. In other words, hold another meeting. You hold another meeting at Memorial or Central or wherever it might be, or somebody suggested the other night holding it at the 4 high schools, which is nice because it sort of covers 4 geographic areas and it covers the whole city. But again, there are people who go to meetings and there are people who don't. You can. There was discussion last night about maybe doing an online survey of some kind. Well, there are survey responders and there are those who don't. And then there are those who play with them. You put a survey on, unless you're controlling for the number of times somebody goes on, the results aren't really meaningful. So between Dr. Vargas going out every couple of weeks and visiting schools, and announcing that beforehand so parents can be heard, the meetings that were held in the last 2 weeks just on the budget issue, where few parents showed up. The fact is that out of the 14,500 students in the city of Manchester, most parents are not of the meeting-going type. And you can interpret that in whatever way you want. So in the absence of an emergency or of a crisis of some kind, then it's just simply holding another meeting is not going to help. I also think that it shouldn't be forgotten by the school board and this subcommittee itself that in the end, when you look around the table at the school board, most of those people are themselves parents. So it's not as though they're from outer space or outside the area, or don't understand or don't know. Each individual on the school board, or many of them, has knowledge of their own children's experience, both current and past. So the real thing is, how do you expand the whole idea of parental involvement? And let's parse out parental involvement for a minute. Parental involvement can be much more than simply this idea, perhaps, which I think is simplistic, which is parents have things that they're concerned about, but they haven't communicated to the school board or to the administration or to the school or to the teacher or whatever. And we need to find a way of communicating with them to find out that which they sort of know. If you take that body of things, then the real questions are about how do you contact them, what's another way of contacting them. But parent involvement goes beyond that. There's the issue of volunteerism and parent volunteers. And some time was spent at the meeting last night talking about examining school policies with regard to parental volunteerism. This area is fraught with difficulty. It's it's something you can get wrapped around the axle on because it's not a simple thing. Now, I don't get excited about it because it's sort of policy driven and it's more drudgery of, paragraph 4, subline 3, the kind of thing that totally disinterests me. But the reason why it's complicated is because, just think about it. When I send my kids off to school in the morning, I entrust them to a set of professionals who are fully qualified and as professional teachers, who are under the guidance of a set of administrators in schools that I know by administrators that I know. And so there's a high level of trust. When my kids were little and I dropped them off at the top of the driveway in second or third or first grade, I trusted the teachers and the schools I was putting them in. The idea that some parent is coming in to volunteer to help sounds wonderful until you stop for a second and you think about, well, who's this parent coming in? And I know, for instance, from my experience in one of the private schools in Manchester, that I was involved in, we had back many years ago, but we had lots of parents would come in, teachers, when there was a teacher meeting at that school, the parents would come in and a parent would take each one of the classes for the 45 minutes of the, whatever it was, like once a month or something. There was an all teachers meeting at this small private school. And but then there were people who volunteered in that school, and I remember one person who volunteered who was there. He was very agenda driven. He was, a bit of a religious sort of, I don't want to be derogatory, anyway, he was very orthodox, very conservative, he wanted kids to be impractically, Catholic and pure or something, I don't know, but it came across, and he, from his point of view, he was there as a retired person giving up of his time to help out. From the kid's point of view, he lacked empathy with little children, and so and he was there to pass on his particular view of things anyway, and I found that very problematic. So the other thing is, there are people who volunteer in schools who are not qualified to volunteer. To be blunt, I know that people who are deviants and people who are sexual predators, I was very conscious of this in the years I spent involved in sports, and particularly when I was at Manchester North Soccer League, and when we ran the British are Coming soccer camp, which, by the way, is a wonderful camp if you want to send your kids someplace great this summer. But I was always conscious of the fact that the people who came, parents, dads and moms, etc., and people who came and wanted to volunteer, whether it was cooking burgers or helping out with lining fields and all the rest of it, there had to be a high level of surveillance, or a high level of awareness is a better word, that there are people in the world who look very normal, and have learned how to trick others basically into trusting them, and so you have to be ever vigilant, because pedophiles. Not that I'm an expert in this, but because I've worked with children for a long time and know something about it through that, and some courses I've done as a result of that work, etc. Pedophiles seek out places that are, target-rich environments. You don't find pedophiles volunteering at the Cashin Centre. I mean, they might, but that's what they're doing when they're not busy doing the other things they do. They seek out places with their kids. So this idea, I'm all for parental involvement, and I think it should be encouraged and it should be increased. But the idea of how we make sure that when we go to a different level of volunteerism, where people are actually in classrooms, etc., there should be a very high standard for who those people are. Now, the difficulty with that, of course, is when you want to do a field trip to the John Clayton's museum or historical society in Manchester, and you need some parent volunteers to go and help to chaperone the kids. You don't want them to have it to go through some, background check and fingerprinting, and so the difficulty is finding the happy medium. But I do agree with, and I'm happy that the through this committee and with the help of this new committee, that one of the things that's going to be done is is a revamping of the volunteer handbook and the policies and standards, etc., that are going to be implemented by the city. I think that's an important piece of work. And I note, by the way, that the people from Parker Varney, once again, are sort of leading the effort in this regard, because they have a robust program, and so yeah, so hopefully that goes on and develops. I just That's a discrete piece of work around that volunteerism thing that can be put in a box and worked on over time. The issue about communicating with parents and parental involvement, the issue about communicating with parents is another box. And then there's the larger overarching piece, which is parental involvement. And parental involvement is everything from parents just being aware on a one-to-one basis of their own kids' position in the school, what their kids are doing, that they're responsive to when there's a difficulty with their kid or not a difficulty with their kid, and that difficulty might be educational or academic or health or social or whatever it is, but that there be this binary two-way communication thing happening between the school and the school district and the teacher, and on the other side the parent of the kid. How is that enhanced? I think would be a good place to spend some time. We have the Aspen system, which I often talk about on this show, that people should use the Aspen system, especially as kids grow older. When they're elementary, elementary kids come running home, and while their information may be a little garbled, they love to tell you about what Mrs. Smith did today and how Johnny fell over and Mary threw up and, somebody else, there was a dead bird in the yard. Whatever the things that happened, your little kids come home and they want to share that stuff. They're a little more tight-lipped when it comes to middle school, and by the time they get to high school, and I think appropriately, if they've been properly brought to that point, they are already pretty independent. By the end of high school, they should be fully independent, because they're ready to go out into the world. And if you haven't gotten them ready to leave the nest by the end of junior year, you, the parent, have not done a very good job. So the Aspen system allows people to look in, especially when you get to middle school and high school, and see what's happening in terms of assignments and grades and all that kind of stuff. But there's a discussion that can be had about how that communication back and forth between the school district, the schools, and the parents are enhanced. On a sidebar to that, I noted, I talked there was a piece, there was something happened at Memorial High School last week. It happened, I suppose is the wrong word, but a parent of who had her child at a charter school wanted to look at having their child come back into the public school system, or to come into the public school system, and the parent requested a ride-along, sort of a ghosting, or whatever the right word, I've lost for a minute, of that they come into the school for the day, and that they get a taste of the school, and the request was turned down by Memorial High School, which caused some controversy, and the district is now going to fix that. And frankly, I don't understand that at all, because and I talked to the parent last night, and she assured me that her request was turned down by the principal, because in my experience, and my own kids have done it, they have chaperoned kids, or whatever the word is, it just won't come to my mind right now. Shadowed kids, I guess, where children have come into the school and they spend a day, and they get to they also get a tour of the school, and they get to see how it works, and go to the cafeteria and the library and sit in some classes, etc. And that happens all the time. And it happens at elementary level, it certainly happens at middle school level, and it happens, I know my kids at Central High School have done it numerous times. And we've had many people from private schools and Catholic schools in the district who want their kids to have a look at what public school is like before coming in, and so it's done all the time. So I was surprised and disappointed that for some reason one school would turn that down. But it does go, and it is fixed now, as I understand it, or being fixed. But it does go to the point of this lack of that there's some sand in the gears of the machinery of communication between parents and the school district, and that needs to be. That there's no reason for that. I think the school district, insofar as it can, should be open door, open arms, welcoming. Treating parents and families as consumers of the product that they're producing. I don't like that terminology really coming out of my mouth, because I don't think of schools as a commodity or a product. But I think in this regard, I think it's important maybe that that schools look upon their role, and certainly people in the front offices of schools see their role as responding to the needs of the community, etc. And that's not an easy task, because I know that the people in the front offices of our schools are generally, I think I can say with some confidence, I've been in quite a lot of them, and generally speaking, they're pretty overworked people. And because they're on the front lines, not everything that happens in a school every day is joy and happiness, and most of that is kept out of the sight of students and others, because there's no reason for them to know it. But in any school with, say, 900 kids in it, there are things going on in that school in any one day that are, and I've talked about this many times, about some kid has just had a bereavement, some kid has just had a problem with the criminal justice system. Some other kid has discovered some major medical issue with a parent or a sibling. There's an aunt. It doesn't. There are those things that are going on, and then there are kids going through. There are kids who are having their own medical issues and even mental health issues. And all of those things have to happen without all the kids in the school being aware of it and going, "Did you see Jimmy so and so?" And the first place that it happens often is in the front office. And so when you walk in as a parent smiling with your son or daughter in hand, it would be nice to think that the person you meet at the front desk is always sitting there with a smile on their face and being welcoming. And that's what we should aim for. The reality is it isn't always the case, but the reality also is that it's difficult to do. And sometimes we hold public entities up to standards that aren't actually realistic, even in the private world. Because I think about going to I get annoyed sometimes when I go to medical facilities, for instance, and because of the just what I consider exorbitant prices that we pay for medicine. Or for medical coverage, and when someone slides back a glass partition, and I feel as though I'm in communist Poland prior to the fall of communism, and it's sort of what is your name and what's your where's your insurance, and I find it all very troubling. So I think we should realize that before being critical of our public institutions, we should recognize that dealing with the public all day every day, and especially in what can be sometimes emotional and tense situations, it's going to be hard for people to get it right all the time. However, that's no excuse for the school district not putting some emphasis on the face of the school district appearing true and properly through the people at the front desks of the 21 schools around the district. The larger picture about parental involvement is involving parents even more. So going beyond the things we put in boxes here, which is communications with parents, which is volunteerism. We have the issue of parental involvement and the issue of communication with parents around their own personal kid. But then look at the parents who are involved in school sports, for instance. Most of the teams on school sports would never thrive without significant parent support. And when I think about the important, or I guess they're all important, but the sports programs at high schools and at middle schools and I guess maybe at all schools, but certainly as they get older, the requirements are greater. And there are people whose parents whose lifetime experience with their kids in school is through the sports side. Um, that's where they spend time. They help out with whatever sport their kid is in or something. Then there are the magnificent few who work on the arts, particularly in the music program with the marching bands and with the bands at middle schools. And each of the schools have got a small group of families who support that effort. It's almost the same every time when somebody becomes a president of one of those groups. You wonder, what's going to happen when their kid ages out, because they're there doing everything, and it's always a small number of people. How is that role enhanced? I think it's something that this committee could look at. How do we, there are places for parents to play in this sandbox. That's our public education. Parental involvement in supporting things like programs like First Robotics. We had one of the middle schools lose its first robotics team last year for the first time in years, because the person who'd been volunteering to lead that effort for donkey's years prior to that simply couldn't continue. I talked to a gentleman 3 weeks ago who told me that after 13 years of running a program in one of our high schools, that he was giving up this year, that he just, he's given a lifetime to it, and his kids aged out long ago, and yet the community writ large, somehow another person steps up. So I think we could not formalize these. This is not an issue about policy and writing and practice and it's not about the officialdom around this. This is just the reality of how do we encourage people to become involved in. I think about the arts. Music, the theatre program, especially the theatre program at West, for instance, or the Maskers at Central, and whatever it's called at Memorial. There are so many, whatever the interest people have, there's a place for them to play. Now, what's also clear on the PTO groups, it would be wonderful. Some of the PTO, because the easy answer in my worldview, because that's how my mind works, is, well, let's just have a robust parent-teacher organization or parent-teacher. People get so jealous, by the way, between these terms. There's parent-teacher groups, parent-teacher organizations, and parent-teacher associations, and it's like as though, in my simplistic world, those words are interchangeable. There actually are slight differences between them, and they have different constitutions. One of them is something where parents pay a subscription, an annual subscription, etc. But for general purposes, I call them all PTOs, and that does insult some other people, I know. But in the end, I'm just talking about parent groups, and you can have whatever constitution you like. But it would be wonderful. And one of the places that I would like to see this parental involvement committee go is to help all 21 schools to have a robust parent involvement group, whatever it may be, and so that best practice could be learned from one to the other. We have in our schools, we have a small number. It might be a third, it could be a quarter of schools that have robust parent organizations, where there's lots going on, etc. And they're all very different. Some of them are just fundraising sort of things where they do bake sales and teacher appreciation and sort of decorating for Christmas or whatever it is they do. And then there are others that are involved in other areas. But maybe a third to a quarter of our schools have got a robust parent organization, and then another third to a quarter, whatever that number is, I don't know, but let's call it a third for the sake of argument, have got parent organizations that are there in not quite in name only, but there are two or three people, or sometimes one or two people, who actually they are the parent organization, and in my experience, that normally hasn't. The first thing you might think of is, well, that's because those people kind of own it, they don't want to give it up, and they exclude others. And I haven't found that to be the case at all. I usually, in my experience in Manchester, it has been that these are the people left holding the bucket, so to speak, and they get. I've noticed some get caught in a sort of a rut that they're stuck with it. There's three people there. There's the same three people next year. They do this year what they did last year. They don't know how to reach out. They try to reach out. It doesn't work. it comes a chicken and egg thing and self-fulfilling prophecy of lack of success. And then there's some low-hanging fruit there for the district to help out, because in the end this is not a function for the district to sort of come in and take over. It is rather for the district to enable and allow for and encourage and make opportunity for. And then last, maybe a half to a third of our schools have no parent group whatsoever, and that's a very sad state of affairs. It's sad for the parents. It's certainly sad for the school and the support the teachers need, etc. So there's a job of work to be done there. And then the next piece has to do with the idea of even if you, as I was saying last night, if you were to wave a magic wand and you could get parent groups working in all of our schools, and they were robust and they were working well, they were meeting monthly and they had good programs and they were purposeful and real stuff was happening. Well, that, first of all, that would be remarkable and it would be great, and it would enhance education in this city immensely, and it would have all good things. However, if you had it all done and you were complete, you'd still only be you'd be very, very you wouldn't have covered most of what you need to cover, because there's in the end only a small subset of people who go to meetings and want to go to PTO meetings in particular. And I always found that there are an awful lot of people, if you organize an event, there were always so many people who were so happy to get a phone call to say, hey, we don't have plastic forks and spoons and knives. Would you buy a box of them and drop them off at the school on Thursday afternoon? Yes, all day long. We need paper plates for an ice cream social. Can you do it? No problem. Even the vendors going out to places like the back room, who were always so generous in donating ice cream for fundraisers and stuff like that. So there are a lot of people, a lot of parents who will respond to the one-off need. There are people who will bake a quiche for Teachers Appreciation Day or whatever. You give them a job to do and they will do it. They just don't want to go to meetings every month. They don't want to be on subcommittees. They don't want to listen to hours talking about finance. They just want to, they're busy with their lives. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they don't care. It's because they have other things to do. They're busy with their lives. So, but then there's a whole group of people in our community who don't. So the people who don't come to PTO meetings or don't want to, and that isn't just as was brought up last night on a sidebar conversation about people of other ethnicities, or of different ethnicities, or different life experiences, etc., that they have a different way of looking at the different communities within Manchester. I think that I'm 100% in favour of and adamant that a way be found to reach out to all parents. And I have I think it's a significant challenge for the district writ large to engage with its minority communities better than it should. And by that, if we take, for instance, for a minute, if we take the immigrant community or the refugee community and put the refugee community to one side for a minute, not because I want to put them to one side, but just say that before we ever, because of the reaction. The reaction is, somebody said last night at the meeting, well, if we start with trying to get people from our own culture to respond first, then we can work on others. And I'm like, our own culture, what does that mean? Those words jarred on my ears. And I understood the well-intentionedness, I think, of the person who said it. But our own culture includes more than just the people who are showing up to PTO meetings right now, because our own culture includes poor people of every colour and creed and belief and non-belief and ethnicity. So, the fact is, generally speaking, in the parents' groups as they exist today, and I know it's not universal, but generally speaking, minority communities are not represented in the forms that we have created for parental involvement today. It doesn't lend itself to it, and we have people through socioeconomics or through poverty who are parents, single parent families who can't afford a babysitter to go out to a meeting, so they will never go to a meeting. There are people who don't have a nice dress to wear, a nice shirt to wear, a clean collar, shoes without a hole in them, so they feel intimidated not to come to a parents' meeting. There are people who think that when they walk into a parents' meeting, it's a bunch of erudite, well-educated, well-spoken parents there, and they feel intimidated by that. So before we ever get talking about before we ever get to the immigrant community, who deserve our full support and encouragement to be involved, I want to parse out this idea that there's sort of a them and us, and our community is large and it's diverse, and we have to find a way as a school district. The more we can involve parents and the community as a collective in responding to the needs of our children and our schools, the more successful we could be. If we could wave a magic wand and step out 5 years from now and have a wonderful program where the sort of the tentacles of the school are feeding down into the community and the community's feeding into the schools, that would be this would be a glorious thing, and it would be transformative for our city. But it requires expansive thinking, and it requires something greater than just talking about the policy issues around developing handbooks and policies and practices for volunteerism. It requires something greater than simply talking about communicating with parents and what's the best way from finding out what they have in their heads, like what are their thoughts. Should we send out a survey? Should we ask them to send in emails? Should we hold 42 more meetings at public high schools? Fine, do all of that, but that doesn't respond to all the need. The bigger picture is, and to give you an example, rather than just pose it as a question, you think about how you might reach out to communities by going out to the community. So rather than having a PTO meeting, which I'm not saying we shouldn't have them, but as well as having a PTO meeting in a school, perhaps the school in a particular area goes out and finds parents where they're at. Perhaps that involves church. Perhaps that involves community organizations. Perhaps that's the Y. Perhaps that's the Boys and Girls Club. Perhaps that's the local knitting group. Whatever, right? So the idea is that there needs to be, as I call this reciprocal, this two-way communication thing happening. So sort of education, the school district itself, and administrators, and even the school board, sitting at the top of the ivory tower with very great intention, sort of reaching down to see if they can pull some information up from parents. This is not the model that's going to bring you success, right? It's a much more dynamic and robust and open and amorphous and ill-described scenario where there's a very dynamic, living, dancing, moving, changing situation in place where there's real communication going on, a symbiosis between the community, parents, and the community, and what's happening in the schools. And working towards, first of all, capturing some of that and whiteboarding it out so that it becomes something more than aspirational, happy talk about some ill-defined thing that will never happen. It would be wonderful to whiteboard this stuff out and understand how these linkages can be made and where they might be. And that's something I don't know if anybody on the subcommittee is thinking about those things, and I don't know if that's where they're going. I think from what I heard first is that it's more on the practical side, and I'm not knocking that, but on the practical side of let's find out what parents think, and if parents have complaints and things, let's make sure they can get them in. Well, good. I think that's great, but I would see parental involvement as a step towards the larger making the schools, integrating the schools with the community and the community with the schools, so that there doesn't have to be an artificial link. If you have to go home and ask your husband or wife, to send you an email to tell you what they're thinking, or if your communication is such with your husband or wife that you're not sure unless you give them a form to fill out or a survey to complete, then I think you got a pretty lousy relationship. You probably don't have a relationship at all, and so. I guess if you are having no conversations with your spouse, that might be a good way to start. So insofar as the school district and parents are having no conversations at all, then this idea of sending missives from one to the other is probably a good way to start. But it's not going to get you to a marriage. And it's not going to get you certainly not going to get you to a functional place where everybody feels like they're on the one team marching together to one tune. I use the analogy often, in describing projects. In my time as a project manager of, companies going off down roads to begin a project without even a project. Like they don't, because they didn't call it a project. They engaged in an activity which effectively is a project and maybe a mission critical one, and they actually have begun on it with no plan, no strategy. Don't know why they're doing it really. They haven't had a go or no go decision. The people who are there competing against are fully organized. And the analogy I use often is about sports, right? And it's like, any team, whether it's hockey or basketball or soccer or football, whatever it is, you have a strategy going on the field. You have some planning done. You know who your captain is. You know the initial plays you're going to have. You know who your forward line is, and you've made a decision and you hope that once or twice in your lifetime as a coach or on a team, that all of this stuff comes together, and it's a glorious thing when the team's all working together to one purpose. And oftentimes you go out there and you can whoop butt and beat the other people because they don't have that singular vision, etc. In order for a school district, in my mind, to be operating at its optimum, then it needs to be to know where it wants to go. To have sought help everywhere where it's available. Don't leave any stones unturned. Don't discount any area of support and help that might be there. And if you could ever manage to get a community as a whole, the business community, the parents, everybody, all working at the same time, that would be a wonderful thing. We're right down to the last minute, but I do have one call here. Go ahead, caller. You've got like 1 minute.
Jim, this is John Hopwood. Are you using crib notes down to your left?
No.
Geez, I thought the world was coming to an end thinking that you were using crib notes.
No.
Hey, have a good evening.
All right, John.
I'm staying in for the evening.
All right.
Take care.
All right,
Bye.
John. Thank you. No, I'm as usual. I'm extemporaneous. I sort of there's nothing here. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'll finish my call with coming in from John. My hope is that this committee with Mary Georges and Dave Scannell and Jimmy LaHoo is successful in its parent involvement efforts, but I hope that they expand it and blow out the picture of what it is and the scope of what it is and their ambition for it, because if they could make it work, that would be a wonderful thing for us all. Remember, early closing tomorrow, Wednesday the 7th. Looking for times. Stay safe, and we'll see you all in the week. Thank you all very much. Good night.